We're super excited that you're all here to join us today. We're going to chat about feedback. Of course, we're going to tell you a little bit about what Fellow is about. We're also going to talk about a feedback culture. I know that this is a term that's been thrown around a lot these days, so we're going to talk a little bit about that and also provide you some general rules around providing feedback. We're going to kick things off with, what is Fellow? So Fellow is a place where teams can gather to build collaborative agendas, to record all of their decisions, and keep each other accountable, but also, of course, to share feedback.
One of my favorite features of Fellow is you can actually record that feedback from your teammates, from your manager in one place. So at the end of the year, you have like this portfolio of all the feedback that you've received, and you can share that with your manager.
So then, Mimala, can you tell us a little bit more about what feedback culture really means?
A feedback culture is a company culture where employees feel comfortable to give feedback to each other, to their managers, and even to executives in the company. It's a company culture where there's psychological safety, where people feel safe to give each other feedback. And above all, it's a culture where people don't see feedback as something that is scary or intimidating, but a culture where people see feedback as something that helps them grow as professionals, as people, and as a team.
Having a growth mindset or a growth culture is the same thing as having a feedback culture. The two are so closely tied together. And part of that is breaking down some of those barriers so that everyone feels comfortable and feels that psychological safety, so that they feel that they're able to share information with their manager, with their manager's manager, and ensuring that all of that feedback is taken well and also put back into the company.
This is one of my favorite quotes from the book Radical Candor. If you haven't read it, I 100% recommend it for all managers and leaders. But basically what Kim Scott says is that the best way to build a culture of radical candor is to ask for people to criticize you. Because like you're showing employees that you can be wrong, that you're not always right, and that you want to hear about it when you are making a mistake or maybe not doing things in the best way possible. So if you want to build a feedback culture, or what Kim Scott calls a culture of radical candor, the best thing you can do is ask for feedback about yourself first as a leader.
And we have a lot of other tools of the trade here to talk about. So let's chat about how to give feedback.
For sure. So we talked about the first one, right? Like if you want to give feedback effectively, Kim Scott says this, you need to ask for feedback about yourself first to establish that psychological safety, that idea that it's okay to receive feedback because as a manager, as a leader, you're asking for it. So it means that it's something good. The second step to give feedback effectively, and this is another one of my favorite takeaways from this book, Radical Candor, is to praise in public and criticize in private. I think that's a mantra that all managers should have on their desk or their office, to remember to praise their teammates in public, whether that is through a Slack channel, in a team meeting, and at an all-hands meeting. Studies show that the majority of people like being praised in public. On the other hand, no one likes being criticized in public. So as a manager, you should always remember to share feedback in a private space, like a one-on-one meeting with your direct reports, instead of a team meeting, or even worse, a group chat or a group email. That leads me to my third point, which is being specific. If you have some feedback to share with your direct reports or anyone in your company, really, it's very important to give specific examples. So a lot of us fall into the trap of sharing feedback that is very broad. For example, if I told Sarah, like, hey, Sarah, I think you're very disorganized. But then I think the best way to give this piece of feedback would be to point to specific examples and specific projects or instances when I have seen that behavior. Point to specific examples and point to the specific ways in which this behavior is impacting the team. So if someone is always late to meetings, for example, instead of saying like, hey, you always show up late, be like, I've noticed this behavior. It happened this time, and this time. And this is how it's impacting all of us because we're all waiting for you and wasting our time, right? So that's a very different way to give feedback. And that takes us to our fourth point and very important step to give feedback. It's to focus on the future. So if I share this piece of feedback with someone about them being late all the time, for example, I think it's very important to then go ahead and coach them on, okay, I already shared this feedback with you. We're not going to stay like in the past, Now let's talk about the future. What can we do to improve this behavior? And then last but not least, the best feedback is timely. If you notice something that is not like the best type of behavior or something that you think you should give feedback on, make sure to give feedback immediately instead of waiting a month or two, or even worse, waiting for a performance review to give the feedback. That's why we recommend scheduling weekly or bi-weekly one-on-one meetings with your direct reports where you can share feedback that is more timely instead of just sharing feedback at moments like quarterly or yearly performance review.
So we've talked a little bit about how to give feedback, but being able to receive feedback is also a skill in itself. First of all, it's really important to acknowledge the feedback that your teammate has provided. Thank them. It probably wasn't easy for them to do, especially if it's their first time providing you feedback. Your initial reaction and your thank you for that information will help to set the table for future interactions and make it a lot easier for them to want to give feedback in the future again as well. And then our second tip here is to restate the feedback in your own words. This helps to show that you fully understand what this other person is saying to you. And it also helps you to mentally process that information as well in a way that you yourself will want to remember it. So the next step here is to also take time to internalize that feedback. Take some time for yourself to process. Make sure that you're thanking them, make sure that you restate that feedback in your own words. But then after that is completed, then also take some time to think about it, how you might want to improve that for yourself in the future. And then you can also take that time to talk to maybe a mentor, discuss how that is perhaps a challenge that they faced in the past and what they maybe did to overcome it as well. And then, of course, if you have made a promise to commit to implementing that feedback, make sure to follow through. Write yourself an action item, write it down in your personal stream. Just make sure that if you have made a commitment to this other person to work on it, that they're able to see that you're actually taking that very seriously. So with all that being said, we are going to take some of these key rules that we've just chatted about, and we're going to apply them to the types of feedback that we're going to go and discuss today.
The first type of feedback that we recommend is meeting feedback. If you want to build this culture of growth, start by asking for feedback about your meetings. It feels less scary to ask for feedback about a meeting than to ask for feedback about yourself. So if you want to build this feedback culture on your team, make sure you ask for feedback about your meetings, and you let them know that if there's a meeting that needs improvement or a meeting that they feel is not being very productive or effective, they can share that feedback with you, and you'll be open to modifying or changing that meeting. And of course, we have a way to do this, right, Sarah?
Let's take a look at what that looks like. Hopping into Fellow here, you can navigate into our feedback section, and you can easily click to create a feedback type. And today I am going to ask about a meeting. From here, it's really easy to select the meeting. And then,
and every attendee was automatically added there, right?
That's cool. So that's super handy and makes it a lot easier for you to then execute that quick feedback right after you exit that meeting. And this we've actually put together and saved as a template. So if you're building this within this form for the very first time, you can always click to save this in future, and then you can use the same form every week.
And Fellow has some really cool templates too, right? Like you can look for templates to ask if the meeting was productive, if the meeting is taking too long. There's all sorts of templates there to give you some ideas of the questions that you could be asking to ask for feedback about your meeting.
So that is feedback type number 1. But we have a few other examples to show you.
For sure. So the second type of feedback that we encourage you to promote in your company and in your team is project feedback. This is super important because a lot of us are constantly working on different projects, even with different departments in the company. And it's crucial for us to ask for feedback about how those projects went after we finish the project. Many problems that arise in projects can be traced back to inefficiencies in your processes or in your structure. So that's why it's so important to ask for feedback, like, hey, is there anything we can improve in our processes? Or for example, next time we tackle a project like this one, like, is there anything else we can do to make sure that everyone is happier or more productive? Get in the habit of, one, ask for meeting feedback, but also ask for project feedback.
And it's also a really great way to ease into that feedback culture as well, because like you mentioned with the meeting feedback, it's a little bit less personal and it's very focused on the work and the processes around it. So one of my tips here, especially within Fellow, is to ask for feedback right before your retrospective meeting so that you can identify various things that you want to dive into a little bit further. And it also allows you to anonymize the feedback prior to the meeting. So I've gone ahead and actually created a template for this already. And I'm going to create a feedback request in the ask about something else category. What I love about this category is that you have the ability to put in the name of the project directly, and then you can continue to use that project tag for all of your other feedback as well. So I'll walk through this form a little bit. I was very specific in what this feedback will do, why it's being collected, and how that's going to be used moving forward. I asked their opinion. How did the project go overall? Would you work with this project team again? And then we get into some of these long form answers where everybody can write whatever it is they like and be their most candid selves. So this brings us to some other feedback. We've talked about project feedback, we've talked about meeting feedback, but there is that performance feedback, that 360 feedback that really encompasses all of this feedback combined.
This quote, it's from an organizational psychologist that we interviewed. She said that giving employees an opportunity to understand how their work style and their performance is perceived by other people on the team can really set them up for incredible growth. Using 360 feedback is a great way for you as a manager, first, to understand how other employees are working with each other, understand team dynamics, but it's also a really cool way to know what people are doing and perhaps not telling you, right? So like maybe Sarah has been collaborating with Michaela on a lot of things, and as their manager, I didn't know about this. So it's a really cool way to understand how people are allocating their time and the relationships that they create with their fellow employees.
And one thing I do want to clarify here, some people do view 360 feedback as being a once a year type of thing. And that's not what this has to be whatsoever. You can definitely collect this at whatever cadence feels the most comfortable for you and your team. But the main thing here to keep in mind is just to make sure to ask multiple people about the performance for that individual. So my pro tip here, of course, is to help to standardize these 360 feedback requests by pre-saving it as a template.
Some of the companies that use Fellow, like Shopify, SurveyMonkey, do this on an ongoing basis. They save a template and then ask for feedback about their teammates.
So for this particular category, the feedback request type that I am going to select is ask about someone on my team. What this will allow me to do is select one of my team members, and then I can ask their respondents about this. What some organizations will do is they will actually send out a feedback request right before this to the direct report, asking who they would like to review them as well. And then from there, you can take that feedback and pipe this right on into the feedback form. So if I go to browse these templates under my company, because I've saved this for reuse, I can go ahead and apply this. You can do this at the company level as well. So not just keeping this consistent across your team, you can also keep this consistent across your entire organization. If I happen to have made a mistake, you can absolutely go into more actions and you can edit the recipients at any time. You can also give respondents a little bit of a poke to remind them to fill this out before that 360 deadline has hit as well. Some companies will do this quarterly, some will do it biannually, and some will do this on a yearly basis. It really depends on how you're structured and how much time you are dedicating to this feedback culture as well.
As a recap, we wanted to remind you of the 3 types of feedback that you could start implementing in your company: meeting, project, and 360 feedback. And this will all help you create this feedback culture, this culture of growth where people won't see feedback as something that is scary and intimidating, but as something that helps them grow professionally and personally. And as we said earlier, remember that building that feedback culture starts with yourself, asking for feedback about your own leadership style, asking for feedback about the meetings that you run, and the processes.
If you have this tool that can do everything and keep all that information all in one space, why not be proactive about it?
Super powerful.